This episode is brought to you by OneBond. I've definitely made some mistakes during my time on Restore It, but this one might just be the biggest. In today's episode, we're going to rectify that mistake with a little help from some new friends and a bit more knowledge than I had before. So, the mistake. Well, as I'm sure some of you are already aware, all of the E30 parts that I've restored on the channel over the years have been finished in the wrong coatings. As you can see, simply through storing them and transporting them between countries and workshops, all of these parts have been damaged, and that's because it takes almost nothing to damage them. The paint is like that of a car's body. Back when I was starting out and using way too much trial and error, I was applying etching primer, high build primer, a base coat and a clear coat, and as shiny as the parts looked in the videos, it's absolutely useless as a practical coating for protecting parts, especially those found on the underside of a car. So to put the new workshop through its paces, I'm going to rectify this mistake by refinishing everything you can see here in a single episode. I'm going to strip all of the running gear down, as well as the fuel tank and pipe, the brake booster and some of the engine ancillaries. Remove the current coatings and refinish all of them in the best coatings possible for the job, ones that will easily last 30 plus years. I'm also going to strip and protect all of the E30 repair panels I currently have, as some of them have turned orange. So to begin with, I'm going to partly dismantle the running gear in preparation for what was the motivation behind this episode. Two of those new friends I mentioned earlier are Harvey and Dan from a company called LaserTec in Reading. These guys reached out to me to see if I had any use for their £150,000 300 watt laser cleaner. And my response was, how about almost everything I've restored on the channel regarding the E30? And they said, no problem. So that was that. We set a date and I dug out as many E30 parts as possible. The original plan for this episode was to partly dismantle everything, leaving things like the bushes and bearings installed, which is a benefit of laser cleaning. You don't really need to take everything apart. However, since starting the project, I've decided to fully dismantle everything completely and just start again, even if it means buying new bearings and bushings. A lot of the parts I used in those early episodes aren't genuine BMW parts, so going back over everything and making sure they are isn't a bad thing, it's just an expensive thing. So, although I'm leaving them in for now, I will be removing the hubs, bushings and bearings from the trailing arms, as well as anything else that needs to be removed before the new coatings are applied. With everything partly dismantled, Harvey and Dan arrived and unpacked the QCF 300 pulse laser, which looks like this. Not quite what I was expecting, it's actually much cooler looking, but I guess we are in the future. With it switched on, we immediately started messing around with it as any normal man would. This is definitely the coolest thing I've ever had in my workshop, and will most likely be the coolest thing I'll ever have in here. At £150,000, the price of a small house, it ought to be good, but my gosh is this thing good. I want one, I need one. This QCF 300 can be programmed to do almost any pattern you like. It's way more intelligent than just shooting laser beams. Like aquablasting, it leaves metal surfaces clean and shiny, like the rust or paint was never there to begin with. It's seriously impressive. After a bit of fun, we're moving on to the E30 parts. One of the cool things about this laser is that it's perfect for removing galvanizing, a coating that will prevent rust, but is also not great for welding through. So we're using the laser to remove it only along the section that I will be spot welding. It's also really good at removing the EDP coating that is applied to a lot of new body panels. I could literally play with this thing for weeks on end. Because I have so much for the guys to laser clean, they've offered to take the parts to their workshop and finish them there. I just want to give a huge thanks to Harvey and Dan for helping me out with this one. We'll definitely be seeing a lot more of them on the channel in the coming months. In a previous episode, I mentioned that I had a plan for removing the rest of the underseal on the bottom of the E30 chassis, and that plan was this laser. However, once we tried it, I decided against the idea as it's one of the most toxic things I've ever experienced, and I just couldn't do that to our beloved planet, so that's still a job to do in a different way. Whilst the guys are refinishing the rest of the bits at their place, I'm going to make a start on all of the engine ancillaries I've decided to refinish in this episode. These also looked great in the episodes, but ultimately have the same issue as the running gear, very weak against pretty much anything, be it physical or chemical damage. I'm not going to spend too much time showing you the dismantling and rebuilding of these parts, as you can see each of them being restored individually on the channel in a lot of detail. So here we have an E30 alternator, starter motor, power steering pump and throttle body. I'll get onto what I'm going to be recoating these parts in soon, but first we need to remove all of the paint and any rust or corrosion that has made its way back onto the parts. The air blast is making light work of removing what is essentially car body paint. Not really much of a challenge for it. With all of these parts blasted with 100 grit aluminium oxide, they're now ready for their new coating. I'm sure some of you can already guess what they're getting refinished in, but we'll get to that soon. Whilst I was doing that, LaserTec were hard at work removing all of the paint from the rest of the parts, and were kind enough to return them to me once they were done. I'll show you the finished results in a second, but first, these two. So as weak as the paint is on most of the parts, for this fuel filler pipe and fuel tank itself, the laser was struggling with just how thick I had applied the wrong paint. It would have taken LaserTec way too long to remove, after already doing so much for me, so I'm going to do these the old-fashioned way, as I don't want to put these in the blasting cabinet for obvious reasons. We'll come back to these later. For now, I'm going to remove the bushes, hubs and bearings from the trailing arms and front struts. These hubs have been bought from new, fitted and kept inside the entire time, and they're still rusting. It's like they have no protection at all. So in a coming episode, once I'm all set up, I'm going to coat these in the same coating as the engine parts, which will protect them from rust for a very, very long time. One of the things I've learned during this restoration process is not to rebuild things that can be easily damaged in storage. Like these brake shields, the two front ones are fine, but the rears are completely beaten up. And the paint I've added isn't doing much protecting at all. So what I'm going to do is buy 2 new rear shields and then blast and paint them in the same coatings as the rest of the running gear. Whilst I wait for the new shields to arrive, here's everything that's been laser cleaned by LaserTec, minus the repair panels. Looking super fresh and clean, and I didn't have to put any of it near blasting media or paint stripper. It's just so easy, it feels like cheating. With that done, I now have the running gear and engine ancillaries back to bare metal and ready for their new coatings. I now just need to finish removing everything from the main pieces and mask everything up. For any bits that were covered up by the parts I didn't take off at the beginning, I'm going to go over them with a wire wheel. I've got to give a shout out to Kodad for their masking tape. It's some of the best I've come across. You can put it in any position and it just holds. I was going to leave this brake booster like this, but then I thought about the paint underneath the brake cylinder and I just had to remove it. It's been a long time since I've had some Synstrip paint stripper, but I'm glad I've been able to find some as it's the best stuff I've ever used. And just like that, it's gone. I can now mask both of these separately and sleep easy knowing that both are completely protected. With all of the masking done, I can now remove the EDP coating from the front brake shields. The new rear shields have just arrived and are going straight into the air blast. The funny thing is, this EDP coating is stronger than the 8 coatings of paint I applied all those years ago. So I'm definitely glad I'm redoing this. All of these are now ready for some more durable coatings. So the main reason I bought the Synstrip paint stripper was for the fuel tank and pipe. I didn't want to blast them as they would be full of media, and a wire wheel on its own is pretty useless, even at 18,000 RPM more than it's rated for. The next best thing is to chemical strip it off. but even this is going to prove difficult. It's taking me multiple sessions of applying sin strip, scraping off what it's loosened and then going again. It's taking so long I'm having to fit it in around other things. It's now day 3 of doing it when I can fit it in, and I'm finally done with the tank. I just have the pipe left to do. With both of those done, they're now also ready for their new coatings. One thing the laser revealed on this front subframe is some of my old terrible welding that I called a repair. I'm pretty sure at the time I thought this was good enough and that filler would hide my sins. Little did I know that a £150,000 pulse laser would ruin that little plan years later. Well, now that Artec Welding and Mac Industries have hooked me up with some better equipment, I'm going to redo this job to a better standard. I'm going to get rid of most of this and add a lot more material which I can then grind flush with the surrounding area. That's looking much better, if I do say so myself. So that's now everything finally ready for some proper coatings. For the running gear, I'm going with Novol's epoxy primer straight onto the bare metal. This epoxy primer mechanically bonds to the surface and provides a very strong barrier that is anti-corrosion and highly chemical resistant. Before spraying it, I'm cleaning each part with silicone remover to ensure the surface is free of contaminants, which is crucial for proper adhesion of the primer. Each part is getting 2 coats, with the second leaving the finish glossy. With everything hanging up and gassing off, I packed the smaller shot blasted parts into the car and headed off to see Simon and Nemo at Cerakote UK. So these were the guys that inspired me to upgrade the workshop to a professional standard. They have a lovely setup at their UK branch where they're able to run training sessions for those looking to become a certified Cerakote applicator, as well as offering sales, support and distribution to the UK. Nemo and Simon were kind enough to give me a lesson or two on how to properly apply Cerakote, as it's quite different from spraying paint. It does take some getting used to, but once you know what you're doing, it's actually a lot easier, faster and more effective than paint. Unlike paint, Cerakote is a composite epoxy coating made with a polymer ceramic. This stuff literally blows everything else out of the water. It's the most corrosion-proof, abrasion-proof, heat-proof and chemical-proof thin film coating on the planet. Corrosive salt spray testing shows that it can protect steel 50 times better than competing coatings. It destroys 6 other similar coatings in a Tabor abrasion test, beating the closest competitor by double and the furthest by 24 times. And its ability to undergo a 32% elongation without distorting or coating loss and withstand a 150 pound/inch squared impact with no coating loss is mind-blowing to me. It's the stuff of the future, although it's been readily available for years now, I just didn't know about it. It really is the best stuff out there, and I've been wanting to get started with it for a while now. For these engine parts, we've gone with Graphite Black H146 and Satin Mag H147, both from the H series which offer the most colours but does need to be oven cured. Because Cerakote is microns thin, it can be applied to every inch of these parts, outside and in. It can even be applied on mating surfaces, plastics, woods and even things like pistons and exhausts, as it can withstand 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Nemo was kind enough to quickly and professionally coat all of the engine ancillary parts for me before putting them all into the oven to cure for 2 hours at around 120 degrees Celsius. So the reason I'm here and not doing it myself is because I don't yet have a full-size oven like this one. I'm still on the hunt for the right one, so if any of you have any suggestions, please do let me know down in the comments. I just want to say a big thank you to Simon and Nemo for teaching me the ways of Cerakote and getting me ready for when I do have an oven. And also for Cerakoting those parts for me. Now that I'm back in the workshop, we can take a good look at how they turned out. I think these look amazing. I really like the finish and how you can see every detail. I just love how thin this coating is, whilst providing so much protection and looking so good. It's just the best thing since sliced bread. I'm absolutely in love with Cerakote, as you can tell, and you'll be seeing a lot more of it on the channel once I'm all set up with an oven and a few more bits that you need to be able to do it properly. Whilst all of that was happening, the epoxy primer cured as hard as nails and is now ready for some top coat. For the top coat, I've gone with Noval's Polycoat Protect. This paint is intended for protective undercoating of chassis and suspension components and is to be applied directly on top of the epoxy primer. This paint is so thick, its hardener is actually part of the thinning down process. I'm even having trouble mixing it. It's so thick in fact that my 1.4 to 1.8mm spray gun nozzle is just too small to allow proper application of the paint. It's going on, but it's just not right. It's too thin and too dry. So what I'm going to do is order a new nozzle for the DeVille Biss or a new spray gun with a bigger nozzle and come back to this when it arrives. So whilst I wait for that, I'm going to rebuild all of the smaller engine parts with a little help from OneBond to make sure everything stays together. OneBond is one of the most recent adhesive and sealant brands on the market, but has already made an impact thanks to its user-friendly, application-focused product range. After speaking with their customers, OneBond released a range aimed at saving users time, effort and costs with a concise yet complete range of adhesives and sealants, meaning there's something for every job. The range includes instant bonds, gap fillers, thread lockers and sealants, as well as specialist chemicals and wipes, all designed specifically for maintenance and repair jobs. For these engine parts, OneBond's thread lockers are perfect. They've hooked me up with their 116 dismantleable thread locker, the 042 instant thread sealer, and the 160 permanent thread locker and retainer. They've also sent over some OneBond PS500, a cleaner, rinse aid and protective spray which provides an invisible coating over the surface to clean and preserve it, as well as some OneBond DG500, a strong but non-caustic solvent-free degreaser that removes even encrusted grease and dirt without the need for more aggressive cleaners, both of which I'll be putting to the test on these parts. I just want to give a big thanks to OneBond for supporting the channel. To check out their full range of new products, make sure you click the link at the top of the video description. So up first, I'm going to do the throttle body. Not long into the build, I've come across a situation that requires OneBond's 160 thread locker and retainer. These two screws sit right in the middle of the throttle body intake, which leads into the engine cylinder head. The very last thing I want is for them to come loose, enter the engine and destroy something. OneBond's 160 is a non-toxic, low-viscosity, high-strength permanent thread locker and retainer. It's highly resistant to extreme temperatures, corrosion, vibration, water, gases, oils, hydrocarbons and many other chemicals. It's typically used for holding gears and sprockets onto shafts, sealing studs, nuts, bolts and other threaded fasteners, and is also suitable for slip and press fittings, making it ideal for many applications in the workshop and on the E30 project. As for this TPS, or throttle position sensor, these things are known to break and will eventually need replacing. So for this I'm using OneBond's 116. 116 is a non-toxic, medium strength and medium viscosity thread locker for securing nuts and bolts that may need to be dismantled for repair and maintenance. It can be easily applied with low runoff on vertical surfaces and is highly resistant to vibration, heat, corrosion, water, gas, oils, hydrocarbons and many other chemicals. It can even be used on oily surfaces, which is why this is now my go-to removable thread locker. So with that done, I can now move on to the power steering pump. This will also need maintenance in the future, so I'm going with 116 again to be able to do that, whilst making sure everything stays together in the meantime. With those two done, I can now move on to the starter motor. As I like to service these myself, I'm going to use OneBond 116 for all of the bolts and screws. And finally, the alternator. For this, I'm using some 160 to keep the rectifier in place, as I won't be needing to remove it again now that the case has been Cerakoted inside and out. And as for the replaceable parts like the brush mount, I'm of course using the 116. OneBond's 042 is going to be ideal for the installation of the pipe that runs between the two sections of the fuel tank, so we'll come to that a bit later on. With everything back together and looking almost perfect, I need to remove the grease and dirt that has been transferred onto them as they were being rebuilt. For this, I'm going to use OneBond DG500 Neutral Degreaser, which should make light work of it. And there we go, perfectly clean and looking super fresh. And as strong as Cerakote is, it won't hurt to give them a wipe down with some PS500 to keep them clean and dust free. All redone in Cerakote, held together properly with OneBond, and ready to be reinstalled. I just can't get over how much better these parts look and just how much protection these parts now have compared to before. And it's very nice to know that nothing is going to vibrate loose once I start driving the car again, thanks to OneBond. I'm still waiting for the new spray gun to arrive, so with that done and all of the repair panels laser cleaned, I can now coat these in Novell's bodywork primer, which is weld through and will protect them from rust for at least 6 months. This is a water-based anti-corrosive temporary weld through primer that is perfect for people like me, who like to take years to finish a car restoration. After 6 months you can simply spray another coat on top, which will add another 6 months of protection, and then, whenever you're ready, the epoxy primer can be sprayed straight over the top. With all of these coated and air dried overnight, they're now fully protected and they match the chassis, which is very nice for my mild OCD. The new cheap spray gun has arrived with its 2.0 nozzle, and I can now give everything 2 proper coats of Polycoat Protect. This cheap spray gun I found online is a HVLP, or high volume low pressure gun, that can, as it says on the tin, deliver a high volume of paint at relatively low pressures, which is exactly what I need for this super thick top coat. It's actually like a paint cannon compared to my other spray guns, and I'm having to be careful not to put it on too thick. It's going on really nicely, but my spray booth is slowly turning black. With all of those painted, I can now cure them with the fast mover infrared lamp from Spray Guns Direct, which will have them ready in an hour. With the correct size nozzle, the finish is to be as expected, nice and thick with a satin shine to it, and it just feels so strong and thick compared to the previous 8 coatings I applied. There are a few pieces that I might go back over and do again off camera, but overall they're looking as good as they did before, if not better, and with all of that added protection. That is actually going to keep the rust at bay. Now I just need to remove the masking tape and put a few bits back on. I'm going to use OneBond 042 thread sealer on the fuel tank connecting pipe, as it seals against gas, water, LPG, hydrocarbons, oils and many other chemicals. It's an instant sealant, replacing the need for PTFE tape, and is vibration and shock resistant. So I've come to realise that the best way to go about this is to not rebuild everything now, but later, as it's much easier to store things separately, and I like the idea of fitting new bearings and bushings just before they're installed onto the car, during the big rebuild at the end, so that's what I'm going to do. So overall, I'm really pleased with how everything has turned out. I'm glad I made the decision to revisit these and fix a rather large mistake. I will definitely be redoing anything I've missed here, like the differential, off camera. And anything I restore in the future will most likely be done with the techniques and products I've used in this episode. I just want to give another huge thanks to LaserTec for letting me try out their amazing machine, Cerakote UK for helping me out with the engine parts and teaching me how to apply Cerakote, and OneBond for supporting the channel and supplying me with some excellent products. That's about all for this one. The E30 project is very much back underway, and I can't wait to show you the next episode. Up next on the channel is a vintage way out sign for the workshop, so subscribe for more if you aren't already, and don't forget to check out OneBond at the link below for bonds that last. Thanks for watching, bye for now.